Welcome to Journeys Through Sociology, a series of interviews with presidents of the International Sociological Association. I'm Lalebe Bohanyan, and today our guest is Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who was president of the ISA from 1982 to 1986. President Cardoso completed his undergraduate and PhD study at the University of Sao Paulo, where he undertook dissertation research on the institution of slavery in southern Brazil, and where he would later serve for many years as a professor of sociology and political science. His academic career developed in the context of a highly repressive military dictatorship in Brazil, and he spent years working in exile, pioneering research for which he would become best known on the interaction between dependency and development in Latin America. He returned to Brazil from exile in 1982, becoming a senator for the state of Sao Paulo and beginning what would become a long, flourishing political career. He served as a senator for 9 years, helping to construct a center-left coalition against the military regime, before being appointed as Brazil's Minister of Foreign Affairs, and later its Minister of Finance in the early 1990s, when he implemented an economic stabilization plan that ended decades of super hyperinflation in Brazil. His political career came to full fruition in 1995 when he was elected the president of Brazil, serving 2 terms until 2013. Yet all throughout this spectacular political career, and even after his presidency, he has exhibited an unwavering commitment to sociology and academic research, often intricately connecting it to his political work. He continues to dedicate himself to the research institute he established in Sao Paulo, while simultaneously undertaking countless visiting professorships, lecturing, advising on boards, and directing research institutes throughout the world. Indeed, the British magazine Prospect selected him as one of the world's top 100 living intellectuals. Thank you so much for being with us today, President Cardoso.
I have to thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you and to remember that I was president of the International Sociological Association some time ago. So for me, this is a motive of proud, you see, because when I was elected president of the ISA, I was already senator from the state of Sao Paulo. So for a long time, I tried to be simultaneously an active sociologist and also a political leader. It's not easy, but anyhow, it was very important for me to continue to be alert in intellectual terms. Thank you very much.
Yes, and that's exactly actually, President Cardoso. I would like to ask you about that challenge of being a sociologist and a president simultaneously, as you say. But before that, just to even ask you about becoming a sociologist, because you've written a book about your experiences as president of Brazil, a book entitled Accidental President, right? Where you recount the very kind of accidental nature of falling into politics, receiving a call in the middle of the night asking you to serve as Brazil's Minister of Finance at a time that Brazil had gone through decades of economic crisis and inflation, and how you were advised by your friends, to not take on this impossible task, but you felt this responsibility and therefore kind of accidentally fell into politics. But how is it that you fell into sociology? Was that also an accident? Was there also some sense of responsibility that fueled that?
Well, it is quite different because I became a sociologist since I was very young, and to my mind, my main devotion was vis-a-vis science, not politics, you see. So that's why I put the title of this book, Accidental President of Brazil. By the way, this book has been just now translated into Portuguese because, well, by different reasons. But anyhow, the point is that I never was, from my the deep of my heart, committed to the political life as I was to the sociology and social science in general. I became a more active political man because of repression, because of the authoritarian regime. I was forced to go into exile. I lived in Chile for many years, and then in France and in the UK in America too, because the authoritarian regime in Brazil, controlled by the militaries, were so stupid that they forced people to become more active against them. So step by step, I became more active in political life. I start by my protesting against torture, violence, and all this kind of thing. And since I was already well known internationally, it was more easy for me to be more firm in my talks in Brazil against the military regime. So I became more popular by resisting to the authoritarian regime. And that was the reason why, at one point in time, the leader of the oppositional party at the time invited me to be candidate, just to protest, because in practice I was not allowed by the rules at the time to be a candidate, since I was punished. I was expelled from the University of Sao Paulo by the military. And it is implied in a non-possibility to become a candidate. Anyhow, the Supreme Court took a decision in my favor, and I was elected as a senator. I was, for the first time I was elected, the title in Brazil is second senator. So only in case when the first senator was impeded to continue because he died or something like that, I would replace him. And the fact that the senator was elected governor of São Paulo, and I replaced him in the Senate. So I was at the time teaching in university, Berkeley, in 82, 83. And then I remember the President Bella was the chief of the Department of Sociology. He invited me to have a tea with him and proposed me to stay in Berkeley. And I said, oh, okay, I can stay, provided you offer me a seat at the Capitol Hill, because in Brazil, if I go back to Brazil, I will become senator. He laughed, and it was difficult for him to understand what was my argument, but it was true. So I became senator from 1982 on, and 84 on, I became senator. And started, step by step, I was more involved in political life. But now again, when I finished my second term, my decision was, well, I will continue to have a public life, but I will not be anymore directly involved in party politics life. So I continued to produce my books. Since I finished my second term, I published 6 or 5 books in Brazil and abroad too. And so I tried to continue to be ambiguous between political life and to be interested, at least interested in intellectual life.
So, and I'd like to speak to a bit more about that challenge, but, just going back in the story that you just recounted for us, President Cardoso, I've asked other, former presidents of the ISA about the challenges they faced as a sociologist, and clearly in your case, those challenges are quite complicated. But can you talk a bit about what it was like to become a sociologist in the context of that kind of military dictatorship, to kind of, not only, sociology clearly led you to a road into politics, but that political context must have made it quite challenging to just be a sociologist, no?
Oh, certainly. But to start with, the military, in normal terms, they consider all the sociology as something subversive. Because what is the difference between to be a sociologist or a socialist? Yeah. For them,
and you were exiled as a sociologist.
I was forced exiled for that. So when I was back in Brazil, still under the military regime, I continued to be sociologist and to try to expose more clearly my political opinions. At the time, I was in very close contact with people across the globe, including in the United States of America, because we were making research on different kinds of political regimes. I remember that Alfred Stepan from the University of Columbia was very close of mine, and as well as Juan Lins, who just died, was also interested in the analysis of parliamentary rule and things like that. So I was simultaneously trying to see and to propose for Brazil what would be the best political arrangement for the country. So I was criticizing the military and proposing a transformation in the democratic system from the presidential rule to the parliamentary rule in Brazil. It was a very difficult task because the military was all the time trying to follow me and to try to see to what extent what I was saying was truly what I believed, or if I was just making a kind of makeup to suggest, other kinds of opposition to the regime. So all time was this ambiguity. At one point in time, they put me in jail to ask me about my conspiracies against the regime. It was in 1975 or 76. I don't remember exactly. So I saw by myself the place in which people were tortured by the military. And this has been, for me, an existential experience. When I became president, I called the chiefs of the military, the armed force of Brazil, and I exposed to them my views, and I said, for me, this is not just rhetoric. I was directly, in contact with what has been happening under the military regime because of torture, because of violation of human rights, and I will ask for public pardon in the name of the Brazilian state with respect to what has been the violence exerted by the military in Brazil, and I will form a commission to try to reconcile, or at least to try to give some compensation to those who have been, punished with the absence of justice by the military, and I did.
And President Cardoso, I mean, when you recount that period in Brazil's history, and those quite extreme challenges you faced to being a sociologist, exile, police harassment, all of this. It's amazing to me that at that very moment that you're taking that on, you're also at the same year that you returned to your native Brazil from exile, you undertook the responsibility of serving as president of the ISA. And can you talk a bit about that challenge? You're in your own national context where your work as a sociologist is in fact endangering you, and is in the context of a highly repressive military regime, and yet you take on the task of serving as a president of a global array of sociologists. And what was that experience like?
It was fascinating to me. First of all, because it's a surprise to become. First, I was vice president of the association, and then I became president. And I took the decision to organize the first international congress by the International Sociology Association in a non-first world country. It was in India. And this was not by accident. This was because I think, wow, it's time for the sociologists to understand that the globe is changing, and now different parts of the globe, including India or Brazil or Mexico, have the possibility to interact with sociologists across the globe in conditions of equality. So for me, it was very important to be in contact with different sociologists across the globe, and to see and to prove by my own behavior that no more the difference between those of the first world and those of the third world, or things like that. In terms of knowledge, it's possible to have a universal approach, taking into account diverse of situations. The theory is only one, and so it's important to work together. So for me, it was a challenge, and very important challenge. I was all time very proud of being, president of the International Sociological Association. And as I said to you, at that time, I was in Senate in Brazil, and I became leader of my party in the Senate in opposition to the government at one point in time. And I was all time referring to the fact that I was simultaneously president of the International Sociological Association. And for me, it was also very important to have contact with my colleagues as a colleague, not as a political leader. Even when I was in the presidency, I never changed my way of life. I think that in the deep of myself, I'm a common man. I'm a professor of university. My lifestyle never changed. Even now, as you know, being former president, I have security, I have guards, I have all that. I never use, or almost never use these people. So I used to be alone, to go to a restaurant, to theaters or cinema or to conference, and to talk to people. I go across the street by walking, because I think this is important. This came from my formation, my training as a sociologist. See?
And you give us, such an example of juggling, being a sociologist, being a politician, and being a man, as you say, in that sense. Yes.
Well, it's important to be a man. The rest is consequence. But let me give you another example of that. I think that the fact that I was trained as a sociologist helped me a lot in my political activities, because I made research, field research. on blacks and whites in Brazil, on slavery, on entrepreneurs, and different aspects of Brazilian life. And I was, of course, forced to talk to people and to be the way I used to approach people is to using common words. So when I became a political man, I tried to use the same common
Served you
word.
well. Yes.
Yes, at the beginning, my colleagues at the university or people competing with me used to say, "Wow, this is a man, a sophisticated man. He speaks more fluently French than Portuguese," which is not true. But then, to put me a little bit apart from the political community, and they have been surprised at the fact that in practice I got millions and millions of votes. I have to remember you that I compete with Lula, the former President Lula from Brazil, and I won twice on the first round. Competing with Lula, which is not easy.
Yeah.
I'm not eloquent, but
so sociology helped you compete with Lula. Like it really served to that extent.
Yeah. It's not simple, you see.
Yes.
But anyhow, and why was this possible? Because I was a trained sociologist, so I know how to speak to different segments of Brazilian society. Yeah. It's not necessary to use very complicated vocabulary to express the profound or not profound, to express
and
thoughts.
I think, President Cardoso, that's probably a good reminder to all of us sociologists to do that.
You know, one of my criticism about what's going on in sociology is the fact that sociologists are becoming more and more expert in very specific and small questions, and using more and more very sophisticated vocabulary to say simple things. Yes. I think it's better to say more directly more simple things and to go more in deep in thinking than using vocabulary to avoid people to understand. You see? Yes. So this came from my training, sociologist.
We're almost out of time, but there's one question I would really, really like to ask you and to end with. And, you know, in your case, if you had not become a sociologist, and also if you had not become president of Brazil, what other road might you have liked to have gone down? What else might you have seen yourself doing with your life?
Well, at the beginning, my dream was to become a literary man.
Really?
Yes. Well, at the beginning, I even had the idea to become a poet. I never was. But then probably if I would be not trained as a sociologist, not involved in political life, maybe I would be a novelist or something like that. And simultaneously, I would say I like to teach. So I could be a professor in different fields, not just in sociology. I like to see. I like young people, to talk to young people. Every month in my institute in Brazil, I receive young people, 17, 18 years old people, or even less than that. And they have a program called Dialogue with the President. And they can raise different questions to me, you know, whatever they want to know about. And I like that. And all this is, you know, internet, reproducing internet. And I like this kind of dialogue between different generations, you see. I think what is important in life is imagination and curiosity. Yeah. If you keep your imagination, your curiosity, you can go through different, you know, human experience and maybe be successful.
Yes. And President Cardoso, I would like to thank you because I feel very honored to have this dialogue with the president and to have had the opportunity as a sociologist to ask you these questions and hear you about your experiences. Thank you so, so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
This has been another journey through sociology with Fernando Henrique Cardoso. You can find the entire series of interviews on the website of the International Sociological Association.